welcome to our daily YouTube session. The topic that we will be discussing today is very important from your mains perspective. The article talks about the history as well as the economics of India's population growth. Very important from your mains perspective. GS paper 1, the part of society, further with respect to what is called as population dynamics. Okay, this question. So what does the topic tells us? Basically the history and economics of India's population growth. Obviously history will provide us with something that is called as historical perspective, and this will tell us that whether population growth has positive ramifications or negative ramifications with respect to our country. So let's start with it. First, let us see what does the article state. The article states that basically India overtook China as the world's most populous country. This estimates were released by United Nations. You should be knowing that our government has not made any kind of declaration with respect to this thing because our census is not yet complete. So United Nations has stated it in its report that India in April 2023, its population reached 1.42 billion. See, this is a distinction that we should not be proud of. Why? Because notwithstanding its genuine credentials of being, we all know that we, with respect to few years earlier, we were the fastest growing economy of the world, and India still belongs to low middle income category. Basically per capita income is around $2,200, that is 1/6 of China and even lower that Bangladesh. Because what does this highlight, or this basically facts wants to state is that in its South Asian region we are behind Bangladesh. No doubt we are the fastest economy of the world, but our per capita incomes are lower. It means what every individual is getting from the economic growth, it is still lower than the Bangladesh, and it is 1/6 of China. So we are quite far behind. That is why country is categorized here, basically that is in the lower middle income country. And starting with the article talks about, first of all, that is something that is called as history of India's population. It starts from basically 9500 years ago to 7500s and coming down to what is today, that is a present scenario, that is 2023. See, over the period of time, the earliest estimates that has been given with respect to the history of the population growth in our country is 9500 years ago, where it was stated that first modern people that arrived in the subcontinent, that was basically between 60,000 to 1880 years ago. Then around 4000 years ago, most of the population basically was living in and around the Indus basin. We all have studied with respect to our history classes Indus Valley civilization. Okay, the kind of population or the basically the occupations that were practiced by them, and it is stated that that was around at that point of time 4 to 6 million, which according to that time is a quite a huge number. And then by that time basically of Mauryan Empire flourished, most of the population had shifted to Ganges basin, and it remained a permanent flourishing area for the population growth. And since 1881 basically data has become more and more precise thanks to the basically census formulations and the UN projections, where we have stated that its population is 1.42 billion and India is the most populous country of the world. And if you take the analysis of our independence, it states that India had a population of 343 million. So that is quite an increase with respect to our numbers where we are at today. So this presents us the historical data that India's population growth has not been something new. Over the period of at least last 4,000 years, we can state that India's major areas, whether that was Indus Valley civilization or whether that was with respect to our Ganges basin, they have always been the centers of high population growth. Moving forward, now you must have studied with respect to your society classes the theory or Malthusian theory of population. Okay, and what did Malthus had to state with respect to our population growth, or that is in the context of the world obviously. In 1798 he stated that population growth would depress living standards in the long run, and he suggested that the way to avoid mass starvation and disease in the wake of population far exceeded that the resources could generate, and that is why he stated that mental restraint should be, moral restraint should be basically exercised to reduce the population growth. So from here what we can observe is that Malthus had a very negative idea with respect to the growing population, and he stated that growing populations will lead to hunger and diseases, and the way to reduce them was through moral restraint such as abstinence from having sex, okay, voluntarily not having children, that is something called of moral restraint that he advocated for. And this view was adopted by economists of the world for a very long period of time, where it was stated that high birth rates and rapid population growth in poor countries would divert scarce capital away from savings and investments, and thereby placing a drag on economic development. So what these things stated? These things basically particularly argued that, say, if the population of the country will increase, it means the facilities in the form of education, in the form of social security, in the form of other benefits that are to be provided to the public, all these facilities would divert resources, as these resources could be used for the purposes of what we call as development. So high population growth basically diverts the resources that are to be used for development, and that is how, when development will not happen, it will place a drag on economic development. And that is why larger families have fewer aggregate resources and fewer resources per child. They stated that the larger families, the resources they have, basically they are cut into number of pieces. For example, this is a pie and it is to be used by 10 people. Obviously it is to be cut into different parts, okay, then only everybody will have a piece of cake, and that is how fewer resources per child will lead to poor development. And this was the view that was adopted by majority of the economists for a long period of time. See, moving forward, however, what happened was that between 1970s and 1990s, this pessimism basically was abated due to, as studies failed to detect a robust relationship between national population growth and per capita incomes. What happened was that basically the general view that we have seen, that population growth leads to poor economic growth, it was held. But over the period of time in the 90s and 70s, the article states that we witnessed high economic growth and we also witnessed high population growth. So this myth was basically what we say abandoned, that population growth cannot lead to higher per capita incomes or what we say increased economic growth. So the study that was done by the researchers stated that which of the views is correct, whether one view is that basically population growth leads to poor economic growth, second view is that basically population growth does not have any impact with respect to the economic growth of the country. So here what we can, you can also see the table that we have hand is with respect to the global population. It states that the population with respect to 1950 to 1973, the rate was basically growth was 1.91, that was the growth rate, and with respect to same times the per capita GDP income was basically 2.87. Now in 2008 to 2014 also, if you will see, the population growth basically have slowed down, but still the rates are higher, but here per capita GDP has decreased to 0.75. So what does this highlight? This highlights that the period between 1950 and 1973 is quite significant. It saw the fastest growth of population as well as GDP as well as GDP per capita. Population growth was also going maximum, GDP growth was at its maximum, per capita income was also at its maximum. So essentially rapid economic growth was mitigating the potential negative impact of rapid population growth during this period. What we came to know is that rapid economic growth as such basically is independent of increased population growth. There are no basically negative impacts with this. The viewpoint that was held earlier was wrong, but then something happened basically after the era of 2000s. What happened was that first of all in the 1973 oil crisis that happened across the world, and then the crisis in 2008, what these both exposed, they exposed the underlying negative association between population growth and economic growth rates. So what we can generate from this, what is the article trying to say? The article is trying to say that when economic growth happened between 1950 to 1973, it sort of for the temporary sake covered the negative impact that was done by the increased population growth rate. It sort of covered that thing that population growth does not lead to poor economic growth, but whenever the economic growth slowed down, increased population growth had a larger adverse impact upon the economic potential of the country, because it reduced the per capita incomes significantly. The resources that were there became scarce in nature and the countries went into the depression cycle. So that is what it was trying to highlight, that this phenomena was only temporary in nature. Whenever there was a situation of economic crisis, the negative association between population growth and economic growth rate, it became exposed. So what further the article tries to highlight is, what does it mean for India, what we have to do? See, it states that when growth rate faltered as seen in 1973 and more particularly after 2008, we got to know the underlying negative association between population growth rate and the economic growth rate. We have already discussed this. Now given the fact that India is the most populous country of the world and it is expected that its population will further increase for the next 40 years, despite the fact that we have achieved replacement or TFR fertility rates, but what we cannot allow or what we cannot do is basically focus on family planning. We have some more urgent important things at our hand, and that is India must not allow the fertility rates to go up. We cannot afford more population growth. In fact, bigger challenge is how to best use India's demographic potential. Demographic potential is basically a demographic dividend is the working age population that is there between 15 to 64 years of age. Okay, that is a demographic dividend, basically the area of or the section of the population that has the ability to work and contribute to the economic growth of the country. Okay, some through its taxes basically, or the revenues that are generated for the government, because earlier we were basically one of the where our fertility rates were high. So this section basically of 15 to 16 years 64 years of age that was there, it expanded like anything. But now we have majority of people that are staying there. We need to provide them employment opportunities, business opportunities, so that they can contribute to the economic growth. But if this dividend is not what we say utilized, it will turn into demographic liability, because majority of the people will be sitting idle. And that is why it is stating that India cannot allow the fertility rates to go up, because if more number of people will be added into this category, then it can create a overburden for our economy. Not every country has managed to escape what is called as the middle income trap. I hope so the term has been explained with respect to your economic classes. For instance, South Korea and Israel did transition to becoming a rich country. Argentina and South Africa have failed to transition. It means you are blocked in the category of, for example, middle income, the country that are earning $2,000 to $3,000 per capita income. You cannot what we say breach that potential with respect to $8,000 per capita incomes. India, which is also a lower middle country, will not, if we want to state that we want to breach this middle income trap, we do not want to remain stuck here, what we have to do is, we will not only have to grow remarkably fast, and that on the sustained basis year after year, but it has to outgrow the negatives of the huge population that we are having. So what does it trying, is it trying to say that if we want to grow economically fast, we want to become a developed country, and we want to avoid the middle income trap, we need to grow as fast, and we need to put a control on our population growth levels. Further, it states that for achieving the higher income status or breaching the middle income trap, we need a host of domestic reforms, especially since global growth rate expected is expected to remain mute, or basically is expected to remain at a lower level. So we need to focus on something that is called as primary health, and secondly we need to focus on something that is called as primary education. Primary health basically will increase your health capacity. By improving your health capacity, you will be having less sick days, and thus you will be able to contribute more. Through education you will be having skills, and with skills you will be having job or employment opportunities. And basically what we have to do is, India needs to find policy solutions to address these gaps, having higher proportion of population working in age group, far from helping matters which can cause social unrest. Why social unrest? Because if demographic dividend becomes demographic liability, it means people have no employment, they have no job, people are sitting idle. It can create unrest, anxiety, frustration levels among the people, that can create social unrest, and the peaceful atmosphere of the country may be hindered. So that is what the article is trying to say. What we have discussed till now, it talks about how India became a populous country, most populous country. It presents a historical perspective of India's population growth. Then it presents two alternatives, how population growth can adversely impact economic growth, then how increasing population growth does not have any impact on economic growth of the country, or in sometimes may also contribute to increased economic growth. Then after defining this link, we have studied basically what does it mean for India, and in the context we have seen that India cannot afford more population growth levels. In fact, we need to breach the middle income trap, and that it can be done by focusing on primary health, education, and creating a policy solution that reaps our demographic dividend and avoids social unrest, so that India's demographic dividend do not transform into demographic liability. So that is all from my side. Thank you.